Traveling is something I've always enjoyed. Road trips give me a certain kind of peace. I love watching the world roll by, towns, trees, people going about their daily activities, the changing landscape, and the beauty of the open road. One habit I have always had is sitting in the front seat of any vehicle. It's not just about comfort, it's about the view. From the front seat, you can see the road stretch far ahead. There is something calming about watching the journey unfold right before your eyes and chatting with drivers. They often have the best stories, tales of wild trips, strange passengers, and the little dramas that happen on the road. But on this particular day in September, my love for the front seat wasn't enough to save me from what would be the strangest journey of my life. I arrived late at the bus park in Lagos, and the 14-seater bus was almost full. The only available seat was at the back, where an elderly woman sat slumped against the window. Beside her was a young man, her son adjusting her sitting position non-stop. The sight immediately told me something was wrong. The woman didn't look well at all. She was looking so frail and weak. Her son looked exhausted but kept attending to her with quiet patience, whispering to her now and then as though encouraging her to hold on. It didn't take long for me to figure out why no one wanted to sit beside them. People avoided the back seat, throwing glances at the woman. But there I was, standing awkwardly with my small bag, realizing this was my only option. I sighed and decided to take the seat. I couldn't wait for another bus because I was already behind schedule, and sometimes in life, you just have to deal with what you get. As I sat down, I whispered a small prayer under my breath, not just for a safe journey, but for the sick woman beside me. I had no idea that this would be the longest and strangest trip of my life. The bus pulled out of Lagos, and the journey began. At first, everything seemed normal. The driver played loud music from his speakers, a mix of Afrobeat songs that most passengers sang along and tapped their feet in rhythm. Some passengers were talking and joking with each other. A few others, like me, sat quietly, looking out the window or drifting into sleep. But all the while, I kept glancing at the elderly woman beside me. Her breathing was heavy and labored. Each breath took great effort. Her son kept trying to make her comfortable. He gently wiped her forehead with a handkerchief from time to time. I could see he was worried, but he said nothing. About 2 hours into the journey, we stopped at Ori, a popular rest spot along the Lagos-Benin highway. Ori is always bustling. Vendors surrounded the bus as soon as it stopped, shouting and selling everything from meat pies, soft drinks, and snacks to phone chargers and wristwatches. Passengers climbed down to stretch their legs, eat, or use the restrooms. At first, the young man stayed in the bus, but after a while, he stepped out to buy water and biscuits. When he returned, he spoke softly to his mother, trying to get her to drink or eat something. "Mama, drink small. You need to eat," he said, holding the sachet of water close to her lips. The woman didn't respond. She sat there in the same position, her head leaned against the window, her body still. At first, I thought she was asleep, but something about her stillness made me uneasy. There was no sound coming from her, no movement, not even the faint rise and fall of her chest. I leaned forward, pretending to adjust my seat, and looked at her face. It was pale, her mouth slightly open, and there was no sign of life. A strange feeling hit me in the pit of my stomach. My heart began to race as I turned to the young man and whispered softly, "Brother, check your mother." He looked at me, confused. "What do you mean?" "Just check her," I repeated firmly but quietly. The young man quickly reached out and touched his mother's hand. "Mamau," he called softly, shaking her hand. There was no response. He shook her again, harder this time. "Mama, Mamau." But she didn't move. The realization hit him like a wave. His face turned pale, and he looked at me with wide eyes. "She's not answering me," he whispered, his voice trembling. I leaned closer and whispered, "Brother, I'm sorry, but I think your mother is gone." The young man froze, his lips quivering as tears filled his eyes. He looked around, as though searching for someone to save him, but nobody else on the bus noticed what had happened. The loud music still played, and passengers were laughing and talking as if nothing had changed. The young man was in shock. His hands trembled, and I could see he was on the verge of breaking down completely. I grabbed his hand gently and whispered, "Listen to me. You need to stay calm. Don't let anyone know." "Why?" he asked, confused, tears streaming down his face. "Because if they know," I explained quietly, "they will stop this bus and leave you and your mother here on the roadside. Nobody will want to travel with a corpse. They won't care about your situation." He looked at me, stunned. "What do I do?" "Just keep calm," I said. "Keep adjusting her sitting position like before. We're already on the way to Benin. When we get there, you can call your relatives to come pick her up." The young man nodded slowly. He wiped his face with the back of his hand and resumed positioning his mother, tears still falling silently. I could see the pain in his eyes, but he didn't make a sound. The bus continued its journey, but to me, every mile felt like an eternity. I sat stuck in my seat, my mind racing. I could hear the faint hum of the engine, the soft murmurs of passengers talking, and the occasional laughter from someone at the front. But here at the back, the air felt heavy with grief. I stole glances at the young man. He kept up the act, positioning his mother as though she were merely resting. To anyone else in the bus, nothing seemed unusual. But I knew the truth. That woman, who had started this journey alive, was no longer with us. The bus finally pulled into the busy motor park in Benin. The driver honked his horn and announced cheerfully, "We don't reach Benin." Passengers began gathering their bags, stretching, and stepping down one after the other. The young man sat frozen for a moment, his hands still trembling as he looked at his mother. I noticed a group of people waiting near a parked vehicle. 2 men and a woman were looking around anxiously, their faces filled with concern. They must have been the young man's relatives. He had texted them during the journey. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Your people are here. Go to them." He nodded and stood up slowly. Gently, he adjusted his mother's head, then reached out and carried her body in his arms. At that moment, the other passengers noticed. "Wait, what's happening?" someone asked. "Is she okay?" another person whispered. But when they saw the young man carrying his mother, the whispers turned into shocked gasps. "She's dead," someone exclaimed. The passengers stood frozen, throwing glances at one another, realizing that they had traveled for hours with a corpse. The young man's relatives rushed to him, helping him place his mother's body gently into their waiting vehicle. The scene was heartbreaking. They hugged him tightly, crying softly, while the young man stood silently, his face wet with tears. As I left the motor park, my heart felt heavy. Life is so fragile, so unpredictable. That woman had started the journey with us, but she didn't make it to the end. I couldn't stop thinking about the young man. The strength he showed that day, holding it together when his world had just fallen apart, was something I would never forget. That day, I learned an important lesson. Every moment counts. Life can change in an instant, and you never know the silent battles someone is facing. Pray for yourself and others whenever you travel, because you truly never know what lies ahead on the road.